Each pencil can be used for different effects. I'm holding a 9H pencil in my hand, and I wanted to show you something because we've seen earlier how I can use it and it barely makes a mark. And I can almost press it so hard if I use a sharp point and tear the paper. It has its advantages and it has its disadvantages. Obviously, sometimes I'm not interested in scoring the paper, and it happens if I put too much pressure, but I'm just going to show you an example of something I want you to see now. If I take a 9H pencil, press it as hard as I can on a piece of paper, and then erase so that I got any trace of it off of the drawing surface. Okay, you might still see a glare, that's fine. But if I take a softer pencil, I'm using an HB now, and go over that, I see that 9H appear. And when I take a 9H pencil and press as hard as I can, any softer pencil is going to skip over that area. It's not going to be as dark as it is on the object or the line that I used previously. So that should tell you that if you take a bunch of lines with a harder pencil, I'm using the 9H now, and I put other grades of pencil over top of it, that each layer is going to leave layers. There's going to be gaps in between it. It's not just a bunch of lines. There's actual color and the white of the paper right now, but as I put more soft lines over top of that, I'll still have texture happening in those lines. So sometimes I can take a bunch of pencils and do it all at once. If I want variations like highlights and whatever happening, I take a bunch of pencil a lot of times and do dots if I'm trying to do texture. In the same way I did lines like this, I can take a scalpel, and I'm not using this blade part of the scalpel, I'm using the back end of it, and I can score the paper lightly. I'm not trying to cut through it, but if I score the paper and take another pencil, again the HB, and do lines across it, you'll understand that some lines show up. And that hatching and cross-hatching is something I'll use if I have a dark surface, like if I want to do cat whiskers. If I want those lines to show up on a dark surface, I can pre-score the paper. Sometimes if you're not working on a smooth surface, you will actually get debris build up underneath. And what I've taken here is a little bit of salt. Could have been anything, sand, pencil shavings. And if I take a hard pencil and go over that, I create texture instantly. I can go in different directions and even change the grade of pencils I use and build up gradations in that. And that's a way to get a lot of texture. But that's using, I call it an artificial means. If I want to take a bunch of pencils and create that same effect, I just have to choose different grades, group a bunch of pencils, and do the same stippling pattern. It can get monotonous after a while, but I can achieve that where I still can take and do gradations with a softer or harder pencil over it to tone the background. So little experiments are techniques waiting to be used. On a two-dimensional surface, we have width and we have height, but we don't have that third dimension of depth, and I want to try to bring that into our drawing now by using a little checklist that I've devised over the years of things that you can look for in your particular artwork or the artwork of others to see if they've done this correctly. Now, as I use the word depth, I want you also to equate it to an area of attention. So when you think of some paintings, you may not want a lot of depth. It may just be a portrait, for example, but it might be somewhere in that portrait that you want us to look. And that means everything else has to focus to that particular point, and that's what I'm trying to get you to think about when we're going down this checklist. And the first is size. If I take a typical country road, for example, we've got a horizon line somewhere in the distance and a point on it, and we want to have one point perspective in this case, but we'll have a row of telephone poles traveling beside that road. The telephone poles that are in the distance, they're going to be a lot shorter, basically. And the ones that are up near us are going to have some width to them, and they're going to be a lot taller. And they'll be showing us a light source and shadow, but we'll talk about that next, coming up in the list. So this telephone pole, make your own style, I'm just using it as an example, might have a few things happening to it, and we'll come back later and check on that. But the ones in the middle will have varying heights also till we get to the one in the foreground. Maybe that one was a little bit too much, but we can edit that out. If I take these telephone poles and lighten them a little bit, but still keep the height noticeably different, you're going to feel that the ones that are smaller are further away. Artists have a hard time knowing how to put the next thing and where to place the next thing in the proper spot going into the perspective. So let me give you a little primer here if you want to think of it that way. If you take the height of this fence post and put a line at the bottom and the top and draw through that spot all the way to that same vanishing point off into the distance. Take another line, and I'll make it a dotted one here, that follows the midpoint between those two lines all the way down to that same vanishing point. Somehow you're going to have to start with a fence post. You're going to say another one belongs here, and I'm just making that as an arbitrary decision. If I take the top of this post, go through the middle of this line where that line intersects that post, and continue a straight diagonal, that will show me where the next post is in the right placement. And if I start at the top of this one, going through the next to the same thing through a diagonal, I'll get to another spot. And continuing that through all the way down will show me where each successive post should be positioned. Keep in mind that this is on a smooth surface. If I do decide one time to put a hill into this picture, all I have to do is take the height that that post occupies at that spot and move it up, so that that post will now follow the contour of the ground. So we've talked about size as a way to convey depth. The bigger the thing is, the closer it appears. If I take something like this pencil and place it where this post is, and think of another post falling in front of it, there's no way you can conceivably think of this one being behind that pencil or that post. So putting something in front of something else will indicate that it's closer to us, and overlap is something to keep in mind. One of the biggest mistakes I see beginning artists do, and think way back, and this should be obvious how far back I'm going. If you see a child's art, they'll draw a house with the chimney, with the smoke, with the sun, and nothing touches anything else. So if you're afraid to do what is needed in art to have overlap, then it's going to revert back to this type of drawing where nothing touches anything else. So every so often, keep overlap in mind. It's something that will keep your art from becoming childlike, and it'll push you into the real world where there is overlap. Okay, in this case, this post would be causing an accident very soon.